particularly when it comes to personal life, seeing something as only being valuable when it's really hard work is not very healthy. When it comes to an industry, the barrier to entry as a professional is too low, and the barrier to entry as a participant is too high. Something my dad said to me when he was very unwell was, and when he understood he wasn't going to get better, was you can't put off being happy. So saying that you've got to enjoy what's happening now.
Luke, welcome to the Open Up podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
So, a little bit of context and background before we even get into it. It's taken us, I would say, I actually looked at our emails last night.
Right.
I first slid into your DMs in February.
Right.
So, just under 6 months for us to get it in the diary.
Uh-huh.
So I'm very proud that we're here. I also feel like it's just going to be such a worthwhile conversation. And I say this to every single guest, and I'm probably going to say it forevermore, but thank you for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
So
We made it.
Yeah, we made it. It's going to be worth it. I was going to say, not even in my opinion, I think it's quite common knowledge that you are described as one of the most sought after PT/fitness instructors/coaches. I feel like there's so many terms I could kind of put you under, or brackets. What do you think makes you in such high demand?
Well, thanks for the thanks for the bigging up. I think that comes down to really what it is that you do. I'm a personal trainer. That's what I do. I train clients personally. And yeah, as you say, there are lots of different hats that people can wear and lots of different hats that people do wear in my industry. But ultimately, I think we can confuse ourselves a little bit with that. I know what I do. I train clients, and the type of client I train has changed over my career for sure, in terms of what they do, in terms of the profile of the person. That's all changed. But what I do fundamentally hasn't changed. I think I've got better at it because I've been doing it a long time, and you refine yourself as you go. But I know what I do. I train people. And I suppose where for want of a better word, the kind of the accolades come from are from focusing on that. That's on being a trainer and being the best trainer you can be, which means understanding what your clients want, understanding how you can help them get from where they are to where they want to be. And it's kind of that simple. And if you focus very much on that, the rest of it starts to drop into place. So I suppose the answer to the how did you become that is you just focus on what you are and why you do it, and be the best you can possibly be at that, rather than trying to be everything.
I love that answer for so many reasons, and there wasn't a right answer at all. The way I've just fed that back sounds like I was waiting for a specific answer. But the reason I love it is because you did make it simple, and we'll talk about accolades in a second, but it's so clear when you're like, I'm a trainer, that is what I do. And I think that especially in today's world where, it's easy. It doesn't mean that you don't wear other hats. It doesn't mean that you don't have multiple things going on within your business. However, that feels like, so correct it if it's wrong, but at the core of what you do. And I get that as much as I'm not in your industry directly. For me, I see it as, I coach. Like, that's what I do day in and day out. It's also where I'm happiest. Yeah. So I really get that. And I think it's beautiful actually that you made it that simple, because when we look at, let's say, the accolades, that output, the shiny stuff maybe, or like the stuff that perhaps a lot of us want to seek because of the way society is made up, it's easy perhaps to sometimes lose that.
Yeah, I agree. But ultimately, I think if you're doing something for the end result, you miss. It's like you miss where you are. Like you miss the process. We're not alive forever. We get one shot. And if you're not enjoying and focused on what you're doing, you're kind of missing the point.
Yeah.
If it's all about, I don't really like this, but I'm just going to do it, and because I might get this award, or I might get this, I might get my name in lights, or I might get, I might get invited on Amira's podcast, or any of these things. If it's always about some end game that you can't quite reach, you can't put off that. You can't put off life. So it's about, I think, understanding and being immersed in what you're doing. And if you love what you do, then you'll do a lot of it and you'll get good at it. And then other things happen or they don't happen.
Beautiful. I love that. And especially in terms of like immersing yourself into what you love doing, and perhaps even as well, like choosing it for the reason that serves you and not for, I need my name in lights. And I often find, especially when I'm coaching as well, if we're seeking that, there's a reason behind why we want that external validation and why that feels like more important, or why we're putting it on a pedestal versus actually what's good for us. And literally what you said, I was prepping for a corporate session I'm running next week, and I think word for word what you said is written in my notes in terms of, so I was like, yes, Luke, please don't come after my job, please don't. But in terms of actually enjoying the process. And I feel like for me, still something I'm learning. I wouldn't say, oh, I've nailed it and mastered it, but something, it's taken me a really long time to get to that space to say, okay, actually, what am I chasing? And the moment right now feels really good. And for the session next week, it's very much around, well, it's about how to be open and why we find it difficult to express ourselves. But really, it's about encouraging that feedback and that dialogue and enjoying the process and not just praising the end goal, because otherwise it feels like that becomes such a big deal. I could wholeheartedly agree. I love what I do on a day-to-day basis. You know, I genuinely do think it's the best job in the world. We're in the make people feel better business, and you can't really beat that. You know, you're helping people do something that they couldn't do before. Quite often, it's something that someone didn't think they could do, and that, you know, I've been doing it 25 years or more now, and that doesn't get old. You know, that's you never get bored of that. That's every single time that happens. Every single time somebody thinks, well, I'll never be able to do that, and then 2, 4, 10 weeks, 20 weeks later, they do it. That's fantastic, and they feel better. And you're helping somebody improve their life, and that is a really satisfying thing to do. And I think if you don't lose sight of that, it's fantastic. So, you know, I'm in the gym every single day working with clients, and I love that bit. And I think if you lose sight of that, or you don't enjoy that, then it's going to go a little bit wrong. Because there are some fantastic things you get to do, and I work with some incredible people, and that affords you all kinds of different opportunity and cool things that I never in a million years thought I would be doing, or, you know, tables I thought I'd be sat at in conversations with people. What am I doing in the room with these people? But it can't be about that. You know, it's every single day I'm at work, and I think I love this. This is great. Every day. You've inspired me, because for you to say 25 years later, it never gets old. And as much as I like to say I'm experienced, I don't have 25 years yet behind me, okay? But I really love it that 25 years on, that's how you still feel. Now, we're going to get into how your client base has changed, because I think it's like widely known you've got your high kind of profile celebrity clients. But let's just take it back first, because I don't know this either. Where did the journey start? Like, what got you into this? Was it something you knew from the beginning? I'm asking too many questions all in once. So just take us back to the beginning. Okay. Where did you start?
Well, the beginning was a long time ago now. So it's all I only ever really saw myself doing this. And funnily enough, actually pretty much in this capacity, how I'm doing it right now.
Okay.
And right back when, so I grew up in the north, and we moved around a little bit when I was a kid. So like sport was free childcare basically. So like before school, after school, it's like there was a different activity every day. And so it was swimming club, or it was karate club, or it was judo, or it was anything that you could think of. So I was in it and doing it, because it's like, well, if you're doing that, you're out of trouble. And that was, let's say it was free childcare. And some stuff I was quite good at, and some stuff I was less good at. Okay. And right the way through being a kid, that just really interests me. And I thought, well, why am I good at this and I'm not good at that? Or why are these kids good at football and they're not good at running? Or why can I jump higher than this guy, but I can't beat him in a race, but I can kick a ball further? And I was just really fascinated by that, because I was doing it all. So I started just trying to figure that out and started trying to think, well, can you get the kid who's good at football and make him good at cricket? And it just was churning over in my mind. And I remember, and funnily enough, a couple of years ago, I found them, but I spent some time when I think I must have been 11, 12 years old, like drawing out little stick men. Of like trying to figure it out and trying to work out how bodies worked and how they moved and trying to figure out, if you did this and you changed that, could you get better at that? And I drew it all out on bits of paper, and I drew these like Nike swooshes on it. And I had them stuck on my bedroom wall. And then, whatever it was, like 30 years later, I'm writing training programs with Nike swooshes on them.
I'm sorry. Okay, wait. You just have to pause. I need a moment of like, what?
Yeah. So
that's incredible.
So I was going to do this. I was always going to do this.
Okay.
And I started, my first job in the industry was in 1997, which was a while ago now. And my first job was, it was in a leisure centre. And so gyms were around, but gyms were not gyms as we know them now. Like the industry was not cool. It was not the sexy place to be. It was, there were gyms. They were normally attached to like sports clubs or leisure centres. So there'd be like your local swimming pool would have like a weight room in it, and that was it. And there might be a little space where they did step aerobics, and that was the fitness industry. It was leisure centres, and I worked in one. So I worked in one not that far from here, as it happens, actually in Wandsworth.
Okay. We've gone down memory lane, definitely.
So I worked in one of those, and my job was setting up like badminton courts, like taking the nets down, putting them up, and cleaning stuff. Like that was what I did, and I was 17. And as I worked for that leisure centre, it built a gym, and a gym that was maybe a little bit more like we might know it now. And because I already worked there, I just loved being around that kind of stuff. I got a job showing people around it because it was like, here's our new thing. So I was showing people around that. I was cleaning the equipment, and then I started to show people how to use it. And then I was working in a gym. But I was working in a gym doing all the stuff that no one else really wanted to do. And I earned, what did I earn? £3.75 an hour.
Was that even legal? Even in 97?
No, probably not.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
The thing I think I'm most in awe from just even like that chapter of your life is it feels like, for me, listening to you, you've got such an analytical brain. Because for you at that age should like naturally be wired in terms of, okay, wait, if we can tweak this, like, is this going to have a result on the performance, or is it going to make somebody better? And I guess I pick up on it because, can I be analytical? Yes. Would I say I naturally work in that way? No. So, and I love to, I think, be in awe of people who have like a different skill set to me. But for you to be that tuned in, and I think I said this to you before we started recording as well, I really appreciate your technical expertise. Like, I appreciate understanding like the theory behind something, especially because like I work out and fitness is a huge part of my life. Yeah. So when I've also as well been plagued with injuries. That sounds like I was going to ask you for free advice, but I'm not.
Right.
But I think it's why I want to understand like the mechanics behind it. And for so long for me, just from a really personal point of view, I haven't had answers. So it's probably one why I like really respect, and I'm like, yes, I want to take it in. But listening to you take that back to being like a young kid and like bring those drawings to life, also manifestation to an absolute core. I just love it because it sounds, when you say, yeah, this is what I was always going to do, I get it in terms of your brain and the way you used to analyze. So that's how you started. That's like 17-year-old Luke, started cleaning equipment, leveled up, started showing people around. At what point did you transition into, I would say, where you started coaching people one-to-one? And was that the next step or not?
Yeah, it was. But also, personal training as an industry didn't really exist then. Like gyms were just starting to exist. There were fitness instructors. There was, there were aerobics instructors. Group fitness was a thing. One-to-one personal training, certainly in this country, wasn't really a thing just yet. So it was just really getting going. Like you could have a job where you would show people around and make sure someone didn't do something stupid. But that was kind of it. And then it gradually started to happen, and I just started to do it. So I had my first paying client probably about 2 years after that. and I can't remember how much they paid, not a lot. but yeah, I did my first one-to-one session. It would have been 1999. And the industry was just really starting. Like, gyms were then starting to open up, and commercial fitness looked a little bit more like it looked now. Like, that was the birth of it, way before social media or any of that stuff. But it was starting to happen. In terms of how things have developed from then to now, there's been a lot of circles, really. So that was commercial fitness. I did that at the leisure centre for a little bit. I then worked for a gym company up in Camden for a while. I was there till 2004. Left there to work in sports. So I did an undergrad sports science degree along the way. So did the academic stuff and did sort of various different postgrad things as well, some of which I still do now. But went from that into freelancing in sport. So I freelanced in sport for a good 10 years. And worked with a number of different athletes. And I'd had experience of studying athletes, doing a sports science degree. I'd been working practically, and strength and conditioning was relatively new still. Okay. The strength and conditioning qualifications hadn't even been created really then. So it was at the very forefront of all of that. And I got to work with lots and lots of different athletes, lots of people I work with for free, lots of people I work with, spend all your time on trains and public transport, going all over the place to work at athletics grounds and running tracks and cycling clubs and rugby clubs and football clubs and whatever. I would take it as work. But it started to click, and it started to make sense. And throughout that period, I managed to work with 5 different world champions in different sports. So 5 very different sports. So it was something that I realized, I get this. Like, I can make a change. And that's what I'd been obsessed by as a kid, was like, well, can you make somebody better at that? Yeah. And I'd realize, well, you can. Like, if you unpick the knot, you can make somebody better at something. So that was a sort of a middle point of my career. I then went full circle and ended up back in commercial fitness, but more in an educational role. So I went back into a luxury gym chain in London, by which point the industry looked very much like it looked now. And gyms were cool, and they were new, and they were expensive, and it was quite fancy. And I was brought in because I had this experience of working in sports, and I'd done it for quite a long time. So I worked for a luxury gym chain that was positioning itself as having like athletic type training and a medical center and nutrition and all of these things all under one roof. Okay. And they were the first people to really do that. So I went in there in this educational role to be responsible for upskilling the trainers and teaching them stuff that I'd learned from the world of sports and strength and conditioning. And I spent around about another 10 years there. As that company grew, it then went from one gym to many gyms. And my role grew as it did, as the company grew, but it started to take me away from working with clients, which is ultimately what I think is my role.
Nice.
So I moved out of that and started to do my own thing again, which is what I've been doing ever since. So for the last probably 7-8 years, I've been working for myself and working predominantly in the entertainment sector, which kind of happened by accident, really. It wasn't planned. I worked with somebody for a stage production, for a West End production. Yeah. I trained one of the lead cast for... Well, the lead in the person who's playing Aladdin in Aladdin. And he'd had a few injuries he needed to overcome. It was, he needed to look a certain way. He wanted to look a certain way for the job because he spends half of it with his shirt off, and he's got to do a backflip. And it was quite an athletic role. And he was a fantastic singer, but he was like, how the hell am I going to do this? Yeah. So we worked on that. And we just had a mutual friend who connected us. We worked on that. It went well. He talked to all of his actor friends about it. And I started to do a lot of the West End jobs. So a lot of the training of the casts who are athletes, whether we think of them or not, they are.
Yes.
And they just weren't. That hadn't happened before. Like people weren't doing that. People weren't training these performers as athletes. So I did that. And they tend to move in the same circles and know a lot of the same people who are screen actors. It's the same industry, just a different side of it. And that just naturally evolved from there.
There's so many things I want to like pick out with this story. Also, I'm going to start with a fun fact.
That was 25 years in about 5 minutes. But,
I'm going to say I was really impressed with the timeline. I was like, that was so eloquently executed. I'm starting with a fun fact, which is actually like very loosely linked. Fun fact is my boyfriend was in one of the dancers in the film of Aladdin. That's my fun fact that I'm throwing in there.
Right, the Will Smith film.
Yeah.
Right.
So I really understand though in terms of like the world of performance, not because I've been in it, but just because I get to see it from the outside.
Yeah.
And I really resonate with you when you talk about traditionally definitely not being seen as athletes. And I'm like in awe because of their stamina and the skill sets they have to master and being, usually I'm generalizing here, but having to be good at all three. Bit of a side note there, but I wanted to add that in.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a few things I really want to pick out, especially because I've had a hell of a lot of either athletes, Olympians, or like fitness people here.
Right.
So there's a few things that I think you guys, when I group you all together, common things that you say. One, it made me giggle when you said, I did a lot of sports at school because it was free childcare. And I remember Michelle Griffin-Robertson saying the same. She's like, my mum put me in running school because she was doing her gym class and it was like £1 on a Sunday. She said, I didn't set out to be an Olympian. And she was like, yeah, that's how it started. So that just made me really giggle. But there's been so much transition. It sounds like this understatement, but a hell of a lot of work, education, upskilling, graft. I'm always a big fan of graft, so I'm going to throw that in. So before we get to, I guess, your world and what it looks now, and definitely like your level of expertise, just taking it back to the earlier days in terms of, I think because you've got so much experience, right? And you've done so many different, when I say roles, not jobs, but roles, it's looked different. And now the last 7 years is, I'm going to say, sounds like where you want to be, right? It's you doing your thing. There's something I want to pull out because I talk about it with my clients as well. When you noticed stepping away from the contact, the one-to-one with your clients, where it sounds like you really thrive, it's like known as your zone of genius. I would have loved to come up with the concept, but I haven't. It's by Gay Hendricks. So, but and the reason why I pick it out, because most of us don't know what our zone of genius is, and you can figure it out. It just takes a little while sometimes. And hearing you just really know that space with your client where you know you can have an impact and you can see them change is what it feels like you're on the money. Like that's what really lights you up. And so I just wanted to put it out because I think it's a really beautiful point for everybody listening, that sounds like your zone of genius. And if we can find, for all of us have a zone of genius, right? Mine's really similar. Mine's talking. Are we surprised, Luke? I don't think so. But for me, it's actually, if I really nail it down, it's being able to like pinpoint somebody's pain point, usually really, really quickly. And it's why I'm really good at what I do. I'm going to back myself there. But yeah, it's also like talking, and it takes on different forms. But I know, and I guess I'm pulling it out probably even more because I've done so much reflection lately. And I really realised when I step away from it, I become stressed, moody, I'm uptight about certain things. And I know then that I'm not doing what really lights me up and where I feel like I am adding the most value. So that's a little learning point I'm pulling out.
Yeah.
Question I wanted to ask you, taking it back to when you got into sports and like the athlete side.
Yeah.
My brother also was traditionally 800-meter runner. So spent many days on a track watching, screaming like a fishwife, waiting for him to get his qualifying time for GB, and he didn't. I think that broke my heart more.
Yeah. Not that you don't let him forget it.
No, do you know what? We've actually had a conversation about it in the last couple of years. It was really good insight to hear it from his, because I'd never heard it from his perspective, always through my own, and I didn't even do it. Question I wanted to ask, when you worked with 5 world champions in different niches, different industries, was there a moment where it clicked for you? It sounded like it was when you were talking to me, but maybe not. Was there a moment where it clicked when you're like, not just damn, I'm good at what I do, but I've figured it out. I figured that not like I can get to it and help them change or shift or level up, and it doesn't matter like what the niche is or what the sport is.
Yeah, the simple answer to that is yes. So, and I think that comes down to, and that's what I think my approach is, and that's what you said zone of genius. I think about and describe it sometimes to clients as being, well, that's your superpower. Same thing, I guess. That. It's like you get back to that. Like if it's starting to go wrong, get back to that. Like, what are you really good at? That, and I see that as unpicking the knot. Ultimately, we're all made of the same stuff. No matter what you choose to do with it, no matter you. So your partner is always a performer. I've worked with lots and lots of performers. So whether you choose to perform on stage with it, whether you choose to ride a bike, whether you're a stuntman, whether you're a scuba diver, whatever it is, we're all made of the same stuff and it all works the same way. It's just how you're then applying it. So I suppose my superpower is stripping it back to that, is seeing the person as the constituent parts. Like, so what are we trying to do? We're trying to get that over there and that moving a bit better and that pushing this way a little bit harder. That's what we're trying to do. So let's do that. And just stripping it back and simplifying it all. And I suppose that's been, you said analytical brain. Sometimes it's over analytical. Maybe we'll talk about that.
We are definitely talking about it.
There's a flip side to that for sure. But there's something clicking. That's what clicked, and it still clicks. And that's what I think makes a good trainer / coach / whatever other hat you want to put on the person. It's stripping it back to, well, ultimately you're just trying to make something move better.
Yeah,
that's it. It doesn't matter what they're trying to, their goal is.
Yeah,
it's we're trying to make these parts move a little bit better and make all this work a little bit better. And I think it's as simple as that. So if you can simplify it, make all the bits work, the end product happens.
Yes.
So my athletes in those days were in very different sports. One was a track cyclist, one was a heavyweight boxer, one was a rugby player, one was a football player. There's so very different, very different demands, but they're all human beings.
Yes.
And they're all trying to do something with their body. So we make their body work as well as it possibly can. Let them worry about being really good at football or the strategy for the boxing match. That's not my job.
Yeah.
It's my job is, can we make this body work as best as it possibly can? And that's it. That's my job.
We need, though, that simplicity, because sometimes as well in today's world, there's so much overcomplication. And I guess I resonate so much with what you say, because it's like mirroring in terms of like my industry and my niche. And it's so important. Like, you're a human being. Like, who you work with are humans. And yes, essentially we're made up of this like same bodily part, same function. And I say a really similar approach in terms of working with humans. We all have a brain. Yes, our brains all work very differently, but it's about understanding. And I feel like this is one of your like key messages, tell me if I'm wrong, but really understanding like that person as an individual rather than like a broad brush approach at all. Now, before we get into in terms of like fitness industry today, and I definitely want to ask for like your expertise, because you haven't done 25 years for nothing. There's one question I really want to ask you, because now you sit in the space whether like it's entertainment, but definitely like the high profile clients. When you first like started transitioning into it, and especially taking it back to how you grew up, and you said, I never knew that like intentionally that's who I was going to work with, and I've been at tables that I didn't know I was going to be at. Was there ever a point where you felt I don't belong, or like this is too good to be true?
No, there's been some unusual times for sure. As I was at one of the nice perks of the side of it that I'm doing now is you get to attend some quite cool things. And there was
you
one.
Can own that.
Yeah.
You deserve that.
And there was one occasion sat at a table looking around thinking like, how on earth did this happen? In terms of feeling out of place, if you like, or the sort of imposter syndrome thing, the only time really when that's bitten was I I had like a interview with a client before I started to work with him.
Yeah.
And he was a multiple Oscar winning actor and, a genuine living legend, someone who I'd grown up being aware of. And then as an adult, just thought, wow, this guy is the man.
Yeah.
And then it came about that we were going to work together.
Yeah.
But prior to working together, he wanted to have a meeting, an interview, and it was in his hotel suite. And it was that. And so I went up it was this lovely hotel on Park Lane. I went up in the lift and the lift opened into his suite and there he was. And we sat, not unlike this, and we had a chat.
Yeah.
And we chatted for about half an hour and it went very well. And then we started to work the next day. But that process of stepping out into the hotel suite, and there he was standing there, and I thought, oh my God, that's, and his very distinctive voice and all of that. And I thought, this is just weird. Like, what is going on here? And I felt really out of place. And I think the reason for that was because that was that environment. Whereas normally I see people and it's my space. They come into the gym, they come into the studio, and it's very much like, well, we're here to work and I know who you are. I know what you do for a job. We don't need to have that conversation.
Nice.
But we're on a schedule. We're trying to do something and we're into it straight away. And when the person walks in the door, they are who they are, but they're a body that's made of the same stuff as mine and yours. And they've got a goal and we're trying to break it down. So it's never happened in that sense, because 99.9% of the time, that's when I will meet somebody the first time. And I understand really that it was the environment that did that. In my environment, it's like, you're a body and we're here to do this and we're trying to make it work better and we're starting right now. It's never happened, but at one time of stepping out the lift into this fantastic penthouse suite at Park Lane, that was
a moment.
Yeah, that was a moment. So only that one time.
I'm so glad you shared that, and it wasn't a leading question because I generally didn't know how you felt and I really wanted to hear it. And it's beautiful because I feel like you've given us a different perspective that we need to hear. And it's one, I talk about imposter syndrome a lot and naturally see it a hell of a lot with my one-to-one clients, in group sessions with corporates as well, because I'm dealing a lot with high achievers. So naturally. And you answered my next question, which I love even more, because I wanted to know what was the difference. Like, how come it's only been once, and that's not unusual. But I love the way you're able to identify that usually it's your space, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to put it into my words, correct it if it doesn't sound right, okay? But it's your space. You know that you're the expert. You know that you're credible. And it isn't about, I don't know who you are, but it's actually looking through the lens of like, you are a human. And I see this with my clients as well, like where the imposter syndrome will kick in. Well, one, they're not usually valuing themselves. Like, they don't believe they're a credible resource or an expert in what they do. Sometimes in other situations, it'll get triggered because it's them versus the exec, but they've been called in because they are the expert, yet they haven't been able to like match that. So you even given us that one example makes so much sense because of, okay, cool, either the overwhelmingness or the grandeur of it, but also you not being in your space. And in your space, you're the expert and you're able to look at everybody as, I'm a human being, which I do also think that we forget sometimes because of social media, follower accounts and blue ticks, which drive me mad.
Yeah. And people, everybody looks kind of the same in their gym kit, but it's very, that's it's my space. It's my space. I'm in charge. You're in your gym kit. You're not on a red carpet. You're not stepping off your jet. This is what we're doing.
Yeah. And we're here to work.
Yeah.
I love that. So thinking about now, because I've touched on already, like your expertise, and I'm so in awe of it. You do a lot in terms of like education for, let's say, fitness or health professionals. And I know you've got a program, which we'll get into. Let me reframe that. If you were going to give advice to people who, let's say, are early on in their career within this industry, what would it be? It doesn't have to just be one thing.
I would say focus on why you're doing it and don't forget that. And what brought you to it. If you're interested in it because you're interested in health or you're interested in sport or you're whatever it is, or you're you know, you love dance or you love yoga or whatever it might be, whatever is your thing. I don't lose sight of that. Like, it can grow and the edges can get a little bit blurry as we go. And I think everybody's journey meanders a little bit. And I think that's, we embrace that, but don't really lose sight of why you started to do it in the first place. Like, why did you choose it? Because no job and career is perfect all of the time.
No.
Far from it.
Vouch for that.
But it's a question that you know, everyone I think will ask themselves, but I always stop and think, well, I chose this. So, you know, no one made me do it. Like, I chose this. So why did I choose it? That's why. And just coming back to that all of the time. Like, what's your why? And the other thing really would be focus on learning your technical skills. Like, if you're a trainer and you want to train people, like, understanding your functional anatomy, like, how does it work? How does the body work? Like, getting into that stuff, you know, we've, I suppose, meandered around that subject a little bit. That's what I think is my strong suit. Like, I think I'm good at that.
Yeah.
I also think there's not enough of that, because ultimately that's what drives us all. And that's what allows you to see somebody as their constituent parts, and to help those parts work a little bit better is understanding your functional anatomy. And that's really why the education part of what I do exists. Is I think there needs to be more of that. I think when it comes to an industry, the barrier to entry as a professional is too low, and the barrier to entry as a participant is too high. Like, these things need to be readjusted. Okay. Like, we see, and I think we perceive the fitness industry as being like cool studios in London. Yeah. You know, and that's the 2%. Like, you know, you've got, you know, I won't name them, but we all know what they are. Like, you've got all the cool studios everywhere, and they're fantastic. But if one of them's closed, you should go to the next one. Yeah. And like, and these people are going to be okay. But the majority of people in this country, in the UK, don't purposefully exercise. They don't have intentional movement in their lives because they don't think it's for them. And what they see as being the fitness industry is the cool, sexy London studio. Yeah. And if you're not that, and you're in a small town up north where I grew up, and you don't look like that, and you don't see yourself as potentially looking like that, it's too much of a step. It's like, well, that's not for me. So I think I might think, well, I probably need to move. I probably need to do something. Like, my health is not great, or I don't feel wonderful, or maybe I'm not happy about how I look, or whatever. It could be any of those things. No. Those goals are less valid than any of the others. Your goal is your goal. But if you see the industry as being in this kind of ivory tower, as like, well, that's just not reachable for me, you just don't do anything. Yeah, because it's too much of a reach. So I think that barrier is too high. Like, it's not accessible for most people, and we forget that in London sometimes because we're all just competing for the same thing. 100%. You know, it's all the different, you know, the different online programs, the different studios. They're all fighting for the piece of the same pie, and that's quite a small slice compared to everybody else. And the barrier to entry as a professional, I think, is too low. Like, you can get a qualification on a cereal box. It's just too low. You know, people are going to trust you with their health. And really the certification is and should be seen a little bit like your driving test. Like, you're not a good driver when you pass your driving test. It's just considered less likely that you're going to really hurt somebody and cause a massive accident. Yeah. Like, that's where you're at. You get your qualification, you're there. That's the start of your learning journey, or it should be. So it should be that you're now legal, and we hope that you're not going to hurt someone, but now you start learning, and you start learning by training lots and lots of people, by watching lots of other people train lots of people. And that's how I spent a big chunk of my career. The mid probably 10, 15 years of it, I spent finding the people who I thought were the best that I could find at something I wanted to be good at, and just saying, can I come and watch you do it? Yes. And it was as simple as that. And that sometimes was local, sometimes it involved a lot of travel. So I've done that in Japan, I've done it in the US a lot, I've done it in Australia, I've done it in Russia, I've done it everywhere where I thought, who's the best person at that? I found who the best person I thought was, and then just said, I want to come and watch you do it. Sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say nothing at all, sometimes they say no. That's what I think people should be doing is, watch, learn, like immerse yourself in it and pick up how do they, if I think somebody's a fantastic coach, how do they do it? How do they position themselves in the room? What are they saying? What words are they using? Like, where do they stand when the person does an exercise? Where do they stand when they're addressing that football team? What do they do? You can always learn something from someone. What's their body language? What's that far and away from what does the program consist of? Like, how is it being delivered? What are all of these little things going on around it? Picking up all of that. That's what I think people should be doing.
Okay, I'm going to recap a few things because it's absolute gold. I'm going to go back to point 1 and point 2. There's a couple of things you've triggered in my mind that I think they're like anecdotes, so I'm going to add them in. I can't stress enough when you talk about, one, being proactive in terms of like, I looked for the people, like who did I admire? And it didn't matter like who they were important to you, or you valued them, or you saw something in them that perhaps you weren't doing and you could learn from them. And I guess like kind of taking that even further, I talk so much around like your mentors and who support you. And I always say like, I'm so grateful for the people along my journey, because there's no way I can coach the way I coach without them. And I remember listening to it. I don't know if I said this on the podcast before. I really hope I haven't, but I talk a lot, so who knows? But I remember listening to Jay Shetty's, and he was being interviewed, I think by Stephen Bartlett. It was on his podcast, and he was talking about a really similar thing and his mentors. And Stephen said to him, who's your mentor? Because Stephen wanted to go and check him out. And he was like, he's a monk in India. And then there was somebody else, and he was like, I can tell you his name, but you're not going to know him. And it was just the power of finding your people that inspire you, because that's how you continue learning. So I just really wanted to reinforce that. Yeah. Going back to point 1 around the barriers being too high for people who, like, let's say you're an everyday person. And literally, I think in the last week, had this conversation. Yeah, I had this conversation with my partner.
Right.
And I really, really agree with you in terms of, we can forget this in London. Like, you're in such a bubble. And I didn't grow up in the North. I actually grew up in London. So I feel like sometimes that's even worse, as much as I'm well-travelled, because London's different to the rest of the UK.
Yeah.
And all my listeners as well are all over the world. So we've kept it very London-based for today. But we had this conversation the other day, and I turned around to him and I said to him, we were in an airport, and we're in a very long queue. And so I started people watching, obviously. And I said to him, I just forgot. It's not I didn't know, but I forgot in that moment how much movement isn't part of most people's life. Like, you called it intentional movement, which sounds much better than the way I was going to phrase it, but just your everyday movement. And I looked at him and I was like, it blows my mind. It actually really upset me. For me, it's like my grounding exercise. Like, I literally can't live without it. Yeah, I love the aesthetic too, but it's actually for my soul more than it is for anything else. And it's just that piece when I just really resonated, and I feel like we have to stress that more, because it was that moment that I was like, I sometimes can live in the bubble because I'm in London day-to-day life, and it's like, actually, yeah, when something does feel too out of reach, or I talk a lot around like your negative internal dialogue and that self-talk, when it's, I don't look that way, I can't show up in that way, like I'm going to be embarrassed, or I'm going to be judged or criticized, whatever that dialogue is, it just maximizes it. And then going into point 2, I mean, I think I probably feel a similar way in terms of coaching as well, because you can get your certification. Yes, there's some that cost $1,000 and there's some that cost 10 grand. I still don't think the 10 grand course makes you a better coach at all. And I really think it comes down to actually your hours and who's mentoring you, or how are you learning, or when you get stuck and you don't know.
Do you enjoy it?
Yeah. Yes. I remember as well, a coach in lockdown said, I don't think talking about life coaching, okay? Because coach can be so broad and mean so many different things. But as a life coach, she's like, I just don't think you have to live and breathe it. And it was probably the biggest statement that offended me so deeply, because I was like, how can you work with people and not want to like live and breathe it? I probably need boundaries too. But it just really resonated with me in terms of everything you said. I feel like I've just reiterated everything, but there were some stories there.
Yeah, well, I'd completely agree with that. I mean, I suppose it's, if you're going to do something like coaching, like like personal training, that's something to do in that health, well-being, wellness space. I think, I suppose being a coach, you might slap me for saying this, but you have to live and breathe it. I think you have to. It has to be your calling, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
Like you have to be in with 2 feet if you want to. It's tough. Like there are a lot of people trying to do the same thing. There's a lot of you're I know it's something you want to talk about a bit later, but you're going to have to be everything to yourself, and a lot of the time you're going to have to be everything to a lot of other people all at the same time. It's really, really hard. Like, and if you aren't living and breathing it, if you want a job where you're going to start at 9 o'clock, you're going to finish at 5:15 and then go home and put your feet up and not think about it till the next day, it's the wrong job. Like it is, it is not going to be that.
Don't do it.
Not ever.
Yeah.
And if that's what you want, do something else. Then that's fine. Like not everybody has to live their life that way. And if everybody did, I had this conversation with a client of mine in the week he's a musician, and he's a multiple award-winning musician, and we were talking about different people and different careers, and saying, but if everybody could do it, what would be so special about me? And that's the thing. Him being a very creative musician comes with a lot of demons, and there's lots of things that he can't do, and there's lots of normal things that lots of normal people can do and enjoy that he can't do. But then there's things that he can do that other people can't. And if we were all the same, if we were all super talented, creative musicians, music wouldn't be fun and exciting and interesting, and going to a show because you think, well, I can do that.
Yeah.
We need different kinds of people doing different kinds of things, and that's fine. But if you're in, if I wanted to be a Brit Award winning musician, I'd firstly have to have the talent, which I don't. and secondly, I'd be having to work at it the same way he works at that. And be having to live and breathe it, and be in his studio till 4 o'clock in the morning because he's in the zone. That's what it takes. And if I want to just have a job where I sit in a cubicle from 9 to 5, and I get my satisfaction and my sense of self from other things, from a hobby, or from family, from all of these things, which I know I've no more or less worth than anyone else's, then it's different. But we need all of these different people. We need the people doing that, because they're the ones who are going to get excited by the music. They're the ones who are going to go and watch the films, and we can't all be doing that.
Yeah. I think honestly that hit the nail on the head, especially in terms of where we get our sense of self, and that it's okay for us all to be different. The world needs it. I remember one of my first ever managers saying that, and I think I was going for like my first promotion, and he was like, and I think I was getting frustrated about something. And he was like, okay, Mira, if everyone's going to work on your level, he's like, everyone's going for the same promotion and we're not going to work as a team. And it was like one of the first pieces of advice I ever got in my early 20s. And I really remember it. And that everything comes with like some sort of cost, but actually what's good for you. So going back to something you said around like, what's your why and where you get in your sense of self. And I think that is so important when you said, and especially because I know that I've got such a community of high achievers that work and career and like what you do can be such a focus, but you can get your sense of self from so many other things. So it's just find what's good for you, find what's right for you. How do you, I feel like we're here in this space, so I'm going for it.
Okay, go on. Yeah. Let's have it. Yeah.
Okay, you're a business owner. You have many different hats, right? You are Nike consultant. Is that correct? Have I said the correct title? Do you need to clarify that?
Yeah, you can call it what you want.
No, clarify it for me, please.
Yeah. Actually, consultant is currently the correct term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, it's your podcast, so you get to change it. You've got your one-to-one clients, which we talked heavily about. You've got your educational program, which is for fitness professionals, where you're upskilling them. And you've got your amazing, incredible app, which I'm going to ask you about a little bit more. Okay. So if I wanted to work out, I'd join your app.
Oh, thanks. That's it.
How do you, that's just like one, that's also just the parts of your business that I know, right? I don't see the behind the scenes. I don't know your day to day. I know you spend a hell of a lot of time with your one-to-one clients. Not the question around how do you do it all, but is there any balance? Like, does balance exist in your world? And if it does, what does it look like?
So now, yes.
Okay.
and I suppose, well, but this is interlinked to the conversation that we were just having, really. I suppose what I've had to do is embrace the parts that embrace that. Like that's what I love, and that's what gives me my sense of self. And rather than try and sort of box that off and almost like hide from it, and then try and conform to, well, there's an expectation that you're going to also have this and this going on, and that's all going to happen at the same time. They're going to happen on these specific days. Accepting the fact that actually that's not the life I chose, and the life I chose I really enjoy, and embracing that, and then other things can then fit in and around that, and it took me quite a long time to actually get to that point of reframing it. And I suppose it is a case of reframing, rather than I'd for quite a long time had this sort of conflict of like, oh, well, how am I going to strike this balance? Because, you know, my friends are doing this on a Friday evening, and they're doing this on a Saturday afternoon, and then they're doing that on a Sunday morning, and then that on a Sunday night, and I'm not doing that. So I need to do that. I can't do that and this. What's got to give? Or I'm going to do a worse job of this because I'm going to be tired. But all of these things, and all of these, and trying to make all of these things try and fit into this, you know, into this sort of perfect shape. And I then just understood, actually, that's not what my life is, and that's okay as well. And actually, my life doesn't look like lots of other people's lives, and I'm fine with that. And actually, I can do lots of different things that I enjoy, and I get a huge amount of self-satisfaction from lots of different things that I do. And then I then started to reframe things and think, well, so actually my social life and my personal life and all of these things need to fit in and around how it works for me, not the other way around, not try and recontort myself into this, into somebody else's expectation of that. And once I figured that out, it then just became much easier. But it took quite a long time to get to that point. So there is balance, but the balance for me looks a little bit different to how it might look for other people. But I found a way of doing it that works for me.
What is that way? So if I ask you to describe your life and like the different components of it, how does it fit together? Where do you, and not saying that this is like the same all the time, but how much time, I guess, or like where does work fit in versus like your family relationships or your friendships? Like what does it look like for you? What feels good? When do you feel like the most lit up? When like your components of different areas of your life are together? So
when those things are balancing, when they're not conflicting. So that requires elements of understanding in a social life and a personal life, like it just does. So you need to, you know, people need to understand that I have a job that doesn't just stop at 5 o'clock and start at 9 o'clock. Sometimes it might not start until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but it's going to go on until 11 o'clock at night. And that might be different on one day to the next day. Or, you know, there might be a time when I might have to make a phone call or take something, do, you know, at a peculiar time. And rather than sort of feel anxious about that and think, oh, maybe that's something I've got to hide, or someone's going to get upset with me doing that, I'm just saying, well, look, this is how this is. This isn't a constant. It's not all of the time, but it's just at different times to you. And then that just required me having, I suppose, just quite honest conversations in my social life and my personal life of saying, well, this is how things are. And really, I'm sure this is probably something you can resonate with, given what you do for a living. When you actually being comfortable enough to have the conversation and saying, well, this is how I operate. This is the parameters within which I operate. Everything just got a lot easier. But when you're trying to, when you don't have those conversations, and when you're, you know, feeling like, oh, perhaps I'm doing something wrong because I've got to try and do this, that someone's going to get upset because I've got to answer an email, or I've got to speak to somebody on the phone, and it's Sunday afternoon and that's meant to be our time. But just being upfront about it and saying, well, look, this is what it is. And that's, it's too late now for me to do something else. It's like, you know, I'm not going to go back and become an accountant. It's too late. So this is what it is. And the net time spent isn't necessarily greater than anybody else is doing something completely different. It's just different, and it's spread out in a different way. And it might happen on different days and at different times. But there's still the same amount of me to go around. It just looks a bit different.
Yeah, it looks different. It's a different format. It might not be on a set day. That might change from one month to another.
Absolutely,
or a different season. And I definitely resonate. I also want to say I did not pay you to talk about open conversations, but I'm so glad you did. Because yes, it's one of like the core things I go on about a lot, because it is about, oh my gosh, I'm going to upset somebody, or there's this expectation that's implied, that's not even said. And I say this again and again and again, about the more you avoid it, or the more you think, okay, fine, I can make it work, or I'm just going to please them, or I'll appease this, or I'll accommodate here, at some point it will unravel. Like you can't keep the plate spinning. And actually, I had this even conversation with a client this week, because it's really around their energy levels and their boundaries with their friends. I know one of my other clients said to me the other day, Amira, you overuse the word boundaries. And I was like, okay, I'm really going to try not to. But with this client, they said, I actually physically can't say no to my friends. And there's so many reasons like that run a lot deeper as to why. But they're in a space where they're able to acknowledge and say, okay, at the moment, in this chapter of my life, in this season, I've got this going on, I've got this going on. And so by the time I get to this point in the week, I'm mentally drained. But I'm too afraid right now to say to my friend, hey, I don't have the energy. And even they have a conflict in terms of like double booking themselves, and they feel like they should go to one thing opposed to the other. And I was like, okay, but actually, what do you want to do? What's important to you? And so it's lovely to hear that. I really like when you said it took you a while to get there. Because I know I've just had like my lovely week of reflections. I've like gone very deep with it, but I definitely, what does balance look like for me? I'll say I probably haven't had it, and I'm fine with that. But I know that I want things to like be a little bit different. But also know, like me creating a business, I've lost a lot of friends in that process, and it's been uncomfortable. And with other friends, I've had to have those upfront conversations and say, hey, the way I show up now with you guys is so different to what it used to look like. And I can be anxious or overthink something or worry about something, because I'm still going to wake up tomorrow and I still have to deal with that. So I'm not showing up in that same way. So I think it's actually really refreshing to hear someone that's experienced as well, that's gone through lots of different stages within their business and their working world, to hear that. Also makes you superhuman.
Well, it's I turned 44 in 2 weeks, in fact, which has come around fast again.
Are you a Cancerian?
Leo, just over the ridge.
Okay.
And it took me probably 41, 42 of those years to figure that out. And it's a process. And to understand, well, actually, I can't. I read something a long time ago, and I just read it, and it must have stuck in my mind somewhere, because I come back to it time and time again, of saying like, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. And I think it's so true. Like anyone, I believe, if you try hard enough, you can do anything, but you can't do it all. And you can do I'm going to show my age here, but I don't know if you remember the old hi-fi stereos that had the graphic equalizer.
Yeah, I do.
You can turn up like the bass, you can turn up. It's a little bit like that, I think. Like you can dial some things up, and you can dial some, but you can't. If you turn them all up, it's just going to sound awful. And if you turn them all down, like it's silent. But you can push some of them up and some of them back at different points, and that might ebb and flow, and different things might need to come up at different points in life, and different music sounds better with different, a different level. And I kind of try and visualize it a little bit like that. If like I can really turn this up for a little bit, but then it's going to need to change, and then it's going to look very different, and there is going to be an ebb and a flow to that. My working year is coming up soon. Like during August, I don't really do very much. Like things. Production shut down, not really happens. So I can really show up in a different way in other things. And I can spend a lot of time doing things like my app and things like that. But also there's a lot more of me to go around during that time.
Yeah.
During, springtime, as we discovered trying to organize this, there's lots of things happening. That's like peak season for me client wise. And so other things, I'm not going to be there the same way.
Yeah.
Physically, I'm not going to be there. Doesn't mean that I care less about that person or that activity or that thing, but it means that right now I physically need to be here and doing this.
Yeah.
And that's, understanding that ebb and flow. And I suppose, as you say, being comfortable enough to explain that to other people and say, well, this is how things are. It doesn't mean I care any less. It just means that I might physically not be there then, but I'm going to be there a lot then.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And how does that work with you? And
it might not. It might not.
Exactly.
A lot of times it hasn't.
Yeah. Right. And it's also being okay with that as well, because not everyone's going to be able to accept it. Not everyone's going to be able to as well, like, meet your need, or they'll feel like you're not meeting theirs. Yeah. Absolutely beautiful analogy. I'm a really big fan of like visualization. So I just love the music and dialing it up and dialing it down. I talk a lot about that in terms of behaviors as well. And as you were talking, it reminded me, I even had to have the conversation with my mum. I was like, I don't call you every day because I generally don't have the energy and capacity. And it's not against you, but if I've done a 12-hour Zoom day with my clients who are my priority and I want to show up in my best way, my best form, there's practices around how I show up for them. And I love you, but I'm not going to call you on that day. And I might not call you the next day because there'll be other stuff. And that's taken us time, probably up until really recently, where she's able to accept that. And now she's like the other end of the spectrum where she's so accommodating with it. And I'm like, thank you. But that also took several conversations to have with her and constant reiteration. And I think probably as well because she didn't have insight to what my day-to-day looked like, and I don't think she could quite get her head around it in the beginning. Sorry, Mum, doing you a disservice. I was like, sorry.
Well, also, I think there's a generational part of that as well, in that jobs and businesses looked different.
Yes.
We didn't have social media. We didn't have, I'm old enough to have worked in the same industry when we had it, when we didn't have it. And it was different. It looked different. There were fewer things to do. And there were fewer ways to go about it. So if you've lived all of your working life without any of that, and now working lives have that and people are accessible, and I suppose there's a difference between being available and being accessible, and that's probably right in your sweet spot. But yeah, I think I can totally understand why that would be a conversation that would need to be had a few times.
Yeah, definitely. Now I'm like super happy when she can comment on my IG post. I'm like, Mum, you know how to use it? Okay, thank you. That's impressive. So we touched on earlier when I observed that I feel like you're quite an analytical thinker, and I think that is why, like, your technical aspects of your role in your industry and what you do. And you said, there's a downside to that. Yeah. What's the downside?
Analyzing everything, including myself. And that's, but also being now, so 44 in a couple of weeks, and now I understand that, and I understand when I'm doing it, and I understand, and I also understand why. So I grew up in a little town in the north. I moved to London when I was just 17, just turning 18. Okay. In 97, and when I was a kid, like, things were quite hard in the north in those days, and we didn't have very much. So anything you had to work for, and that was drilled into me as a kid all the time. So if whatever you want, like, work for it, work really hard for it, and then you'll value it. And if something comes easy, you don't value it.
This is like the crux of everything I've had to unpack in my life. So I'm like, and that was an approach to life. So if you want to work for yourself, you want to work hard, you want to build a career, that's fantastic, because you get it. You're like, right, well, like, I'll outwork anyone. We go head to head, like, one of us is going to die. Like, that's I resonate so deeply with that. I'm like, should I be admitting that?
That's like, you're going to give up first. That's how I see it. Like, this is, you might be starting from a different place. You might be cleverer. You might have more money at your disposal, whatever. But, like, you're going to give up first. And that's the way I see it. And that's, as I say, that's fantastic for building a business. Not so fantastic for other things. and particularly when it comes to personal life, seeing something as only being valuable when it's really hard work is not very healthy, as I've discovered many times over. And conversely, not seeing something as valuable because it's easy. So that's the flip side to that, for sure. I've been through a few incarnations of that in my personal life of thinking, well, that's like you should work really hard for that, and like that's valuable because it's difficult. And if that's something or someone is like is easy and comfortable, and then well, where's the value in that? Because that's what I grew up believing, and that's how it was framed to me as a kid. Was, well, if other kids have like more stuff, like they don't value it. And I thought, yeah, you're right. They don't. And I could see it. It's like they don't. Like they've got like their new trainers and their new stuff and their new bikes, and they don't value it. They leave it outside. Like, and so when you work hard for something and you get it, you take care of it. And I'm not leaving my stuff outside, and I'm cleaning my things and I'm hanging my clothes up, and like, because you care about it, because you worked hard for it. But people aren't things, and it doesn't work that way. And that took quite a long time. So that's the flip side of that, for sure.
I'm so here with you on that one. And it's that, I think I literally wrote a post on this literally a few days ago. So didn't even know this is going to come full circle. But it's that thing of like, what's fueling you and what's your fire? But when is it tipping into like it being toxic or unhelpful, whatever language you want to use? One of my mantras that I think I'm getting better at it, but I know that that's my default as well, is things can come to me easily. Like, and that I can enjoy that. Because if it did, there was a point in my life where I was like, it's wrong.
Yeah.
Like, okay, cool.
It feels uncomfortable and unfamiliar. And like, no, that's not how it's meant to be hard.
Yeah. And then it's retraining your whole entire nervous system to be able to sit in a space where, one, you can enjoy things without it being hard. And it doesn't take away from the work ethic and being, because that is so ingrained. Like, that's not going anywhere. But it's because I'm putting us both in the same category, okay? We're overdoing, and it's actually, okay, let's reframe. And when it is deeply ingrained, it takes a little bit more than reframing as well. Now, going back to something else, because I feel like we haven't touched on this, and I feel like it's such a core part, I can't like round this up without talking about it. When you talked about the industry as a whole and like the two kind of common problems, and not making fitness as accessible as perhaps it could be, is it fair to say that your app is partly a solution to that?
I like your work.
Thank you. I was quite proud of that one.
Yeah.
Like, tell us a little bit more about it. What could I expect if I did join it?
Yeah. So the principle of the app is that it is a program that is designed to be accessible. There is put some brackets around that, in that it requires access to equipment. It's not something you can do, on the edge of your sofa. It's not that. Yeah. I created it because it's genuinely based on the programs that my clients follow. And I wanted to be authentic with that. And I wasn't going to, I'll choose my words carefully. I wasn't going to, I can't think of a polite way of saying it.
Compromise?
No, it wasn't the word that was about to come out.
I was like, you can say it. Be authentic. Say it. I don't mind.
I wasn't going to bullshit people and say, look, right, well, you can look like this movie star by doing mountain climbs on your kitchen floor, because you can't.
Okay.
All right. I'm not going to say that.
We can accept that.
All right. And what I wanted to say was, no, this is roughly how these people train. And that's roughly how these people trained to do, for that red carpet, for that magazine cover. This is what they did, more or less. And that's what it is. It's an accessible version of that, of what I would do with, a movie star to get ready for a big Hollywood movie, and making that accessible. So it's exactly that. It's a workout. Tapping your microphone. It is a week by week, workout by workout program that rolls on, and you follow it along, and you get the coaching advice. I wanted to make it as close as possible to what my clients experience. So every exercise that's on there, there is also me coaching somebody through that exercise and explaining what it is, why we do it, what's working, what's not working, what it should feel like, what it shouldn't feel like. If you can't do this, try this. So it was a labor of love. And yeah, I wanted to make that accessible. So it's that.
A beautiful personalized program with you in the back pocket with the coaching tips as well. And
yeah, well, it's not a personalized program. I'm gonna,
Okay.
It's not that. It is everybody who subscribes to the app is doing the same program.
Okay.
But that program is genuinely based on the program that my clients do.
Nice, beautiful. You sold it well. I missold it. You sold it well.
Right.
Okay, I want to say thank you, but before you wrap up, I ask every single podcast guest 3 questions.
Right.
It can be something you said already or something new. So first one is, what's either your favorite quote or food for thought that you want to leave our listeners with?
I'd say it's to find your why.
I really love that.
Yeah, I think it's that. I think if you find your why, you can stay present and enjoying what you're doing. If it's about, so this might trigger off a whole other conversation with you. So I lost both of my parents before, like it was a few years ago now, and through ill health, which is one of the reasons why I care about health a lot. And something my dad said to me when he was very unwell was, and when he understood he wasn't going to get better, was you can't put off being happy. So saying that you've got to enjoy what's happening now.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Thank you for sharing so much. Okay, second question, take time, is practical tip.
Right. Well, there's something that I did, which as part of that whole, figuring yourself out process, was I wrote down, and this was, I'd read this somewhere, but wrote down 50 different things that I thought were important. And then bit by bit had to cross something off the list to get down to 3. And it's hard. Like you start with all kinds of stuff and it's like, well, there's the obvious ones, like you can have career, you can have family, you can have this, you can have, whatever, comfort, financial stability, any of these things. And bit by bit, get them down. And then when you get down to like 6 and you've got to make 6 3, it gets pretty tough.
But that's going to go and do that exercise myself.
But that's an exercise in trying to figure out what's really important. Lots of things are important. It doesn't, but when you then got to start crossing something off, it gets hard.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really helpful exercise to do.
Okay. We're going to see how we get on with that one.
All right.
And then last but not least, a resource that's really helped you in your life, whether it can be anything at all.
There's a book I read actually, which you probably wouldn't know it, called 4,000 Weeks. Have you read that?
I haven't read it, but I know the book. Yeah.
And 4,000 weeks is roughly 76 years, which is how long we got if we're lucky. And when you look at things that way, it's a fantastic book, really, which just helps you to see time through a very different lens of a finite amount of it. The one thing we can never get more of. We don't know how much we've got, and I've experienced that. And when you know that there's a finite resource of something, you really care what you do with it.
I want to say thank you for being so open, so vulnerable with us. I also, as well, on those 3 questions, try not to ad-lib because I just really want it to land what you're saying. You have been an absolute pleasure. So thank you for taking time with me today.
Well, thanks for having me on.